During September, we've seen the Bitcoin price at its worst levels drop by about 20% from the earlier high. But is this actually a buying opportunity before it moves out again to fresh all-time highs? Thought it'd be interesting to do an update in Bitcoin, considering, again, some of the volatility we've seen during September. The price traded as high as 52,600. We saw it slip in the last few days, briefly below 40,000. Lots of volatility, but we have moved away from these lows that we saw from May through to July. So I thought, well, let's do an update. Let's take a look at it in a bit more detail. As usual, I'll talk about some of the recent news. We've had El Salvador accepting Bitcoin as a legal tender. Slight unfortunate timing on that, as it had a big fall on the first day of it being legal, but more about that in a second. We'll look at the levels to watch, then come back onto the platform and see if there's a trade to do. There is a trade running at the moment. Let's take a look. So there's a couple of open positions at the moment. They are the same trade and filled on the 20th of September. So filled in the latest lurch lower. I think I'd left an order to buy at 43,000 from the last video we did on Bitcoin. And you can see this order got filled. We're slightly ahead on the trade at the moment, up about, £39 at the moment. We'll see. We'll come back to it and see if there's another opportunity and where Bitcoin might go for the rest of 2021. Hello, I'm David Jones from Capital.com, and I thought we'd do an update on Bitcoin, an outlook towards the end of this year. Given that quite a bit has happened over recent months, lots of moves in the price. We've seen El Salvador accept Bitcoin as legal tender. Slight unfortunate timing given what the price did, but more about that in a second. So as usual in this video, I'll talk a bit more about the recent news around Bitcoin, the levels to watch, then we'll jump back onto the platform and take a look at some of the moves in a bit more detail and see where the opportunity is. Because I think that there's always opportunity, clearly, when markets are moving. And I think despite some of the short-term volatility, for me, the trend in Bitcoin is pretty clear. So more about that when we jump back onto the platform. As usual, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, if you could click on subscribe, it does help support the channel and it means we can continue to push out lots of different content on the markets that we look at throughout the week. Okay, let's get into it and take a look at Bitcoin in a bit more detail. So let's just do a quick recap of the last few months. In April, we saw fresh all-time highs for Bitcoin as it traded above $64,000. The first few months of the year, sort of great run for cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin was no exception. But then we saw a sharp reversal across the board, with Bitcoin eventually trading back below 30,000 from that all-time high at 64,000. Various reasons for this. A big crackdown in China on Bitcoin mining and financial services companies not being allowed to offer crypto-related products to their clients had an impact, and we saw this sentiment change and all the cryptos, including Bitcoin, sell off. But again, since then, we've seen a turnaround. So we had it sort of building a base, a sideways range. But again, in the last few weeks or so, we've seen it trade back up to its best levels since mid-May. So we have seen a strong recovery in Bitcoin since the July lows. In sort of fairly major news, we saw El Salvador have a controversial, I think is best to say, acceptance of Bitcoin as legal tender in the country. And the government says, one of the reasons for doing this, it could potentially save the country something like $400 million a year in foreign exchange transaction fees, which is clearly a good thing. Although the day it became legal tender, we also saw significant falls in the value of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So clearly, something like that is going to unnerve the population and make people start thinking, well, actually, is this really a good thing? But of course, volatility, as we know, is the name of the game when it comes to cryptocurrencies. So the government could see strong reasons behind it. It has been criticized, some would say perhaps not surprisingly, by the establishment, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and various credit rating agencies have criticized the move. It's still early days. Let's see how this works out for El Salvador. But I suppose if it does end up being a success further down the line, it would be seen as another step, perhaps just a small one, in the wider acceptance of cryptocurrency in everyday lives. We've also seen some weakness over the past week, 10 days, but this is actually, for me anyway, it's part of a broader sell-off that we've seen for risk assets across the board. If you follow stock markets, you'll know that stock markets had been sliding quite heavily, and I think this is more to do with concerns over ongoing economic recovery from here, and of course, the crisis at the Chinese property giant Evergrande. That's something that has really spooked markets over the last week. And I just think that the cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, has been caught up in this. So where next? We've seen, again, quite the year in terms of volatility. We've had the recovery since July. I must admit, I still think that recovery is still going, but more about that in a second. Let's talk about the levels to watch, then we'll go on to the platform. So for me, I think the immediate hurdles running from about 48,000 to about 52, 53,000, the highs that we've seen in September. If we see these levels broken, then perhaps we could see a bit more momentum going on with the price and further highs set for the recovery. On the downside, lots of support left on the way up, running from about $37,000 to $39,500 more recently. But as usual, let's put some color on these numbers. Let's take a look at this recovery and see where the opportunity might be. So here's the price of Bitcoin over the last 12 months. So it's ranged from about $10,000 back in September last year, clearly briefly above 64,000 in April of this year. Then we had that big sell-off into May and July. And we've seen the price recover. I thought we'd start things off with a moving average, 20-day moving average on Bitcoin. Traditionally, the way moving averages work, when the price moves above a moving average, like we had here in July, that's a buy signal, pretty good buy signal. And then when the price moves below, like we had on that big sell-off, 7th of September, which was the start of El Salvador accepting it as legal tender. So that was the unfortunate timing. Clearly, we couldn't be seen, I don't think. But that was our sell signal back then. We did see it try to climb above the moving average mid-September, but the latest signal we have is a sell. So the latest signal, it's short, the moving average is short. But of course, moving averages are lagging indicators. So the price needs to be usually, at least in the start of a trend, to signal a buy signal. Let's take a look at the RSI down here. So I've zoomed things in a little here to take a look at the last couple of months. I think, for me, what's interesting is the RSI has gone oversold. So this is classic overbought, oversold indicator, indicating when the market has perhaps moved to an extreme. So we had that on the 21st of September on that brief push below 39,500. And if we go back, let's look at some of the more recent signals. This is a 10-day RSI. The last signal we had 20th of July, again on a brief push below $30,000. And we go back again to the 19th of May, which was another push down to 30 or slightly below 30. So in the recent history, the last 4 months or so, the RSI has done a pretty good job in getting the rhythm of the swings in Bitcoin. So that's something that could make somebody think that, well, perhaps there is an opportunity to be a buyer here. I suppose one strategy, if we were a buyer now, is to have a stop loss the other side of those 21st of September lows, so somewhere beyond 39,500, because by definition, if that gets taken out, then it doesn't look as if that was the low. So let's see what happens. But let's take a look at the price action. Let's take a step out. So when we've looked at Bitcoin in the past, in this May-July period, we had this big sideways trading range, lots of support eventually around the 29,000 area, but it was pretty capped by about 42,000. Then we had the breakout, the market moved higher. And for me, even though clearly we've seen, a shift in the trend, a stalling in the trend, I'd argue we are still just about in recovery mode for Bitcoin. It may be some time before we wait and see the old highs at $64,000. But even though we've seen, I think, a bit of weakness, as I say, in line with broader market weakness as well over the last couple of weeks, I do think it's still interesting down here. 42,000 or thereabouts was the top of the range. We've seen it come back and bounce away from that range pretty quickly. We've got good support down here, 5th of August lows down at 37,300, that sort of area. So I think for now, as long as it holds above this 37 to 40,000 area, I think the bias for the trend is still just about up. We have lost some momentum over the last couple of weeks, that's true. So for me, the interim target would be for a run back up initially to those 18 September highs, just ahead of 49,000. If we can break there, the logical target is for a run back to the 7th September highs, just shy of 53,000. And I'd only really start to worry about the short to medium term bullish argument into year end if we dipped below that 37,200 area. So it's run a little bit out of steam in the last few weeks or so, but broadly speaking, for me, still in recovery mode. We do have that RSI signal down there, which has done a pretty good job over recent months of calling the turn. So let's watch it and see if 37 to 40 holds. So still broadly positive for the next couple of months for Bitcoin, looking to see if it can build on this recovery into year end. That's it for this update in Bitcoin. We can see if it can again recover at least some of those losses made since those all-time highs as the year goes on. We'll come back to it regularly, do updates, but for now, we'll leave things there. So from me, David Jones and Capital.com, good luck with your trading. For more trading videos just like this, please subscribe to our channel.